Right. I'm very glad to have you all here. So many people, that is fantastic. And I'm very happy that I can announce some very special guests today that have some kind of prominence. That is, for one, André Meister and Ulf Bohrmeier. And they will now give you the following talk. That is mobile phone query. And have fun.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. Nice to have you all here. Also, the German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer is happy to see you. And we will talk about mobile phone queries, the unknown creature. Who of you knows what a mobile phone query actually is? Oh, right, that's about half, I think. The other half will learn it today. And we will talk a bit about what the problem is with mobile phone queries and what you can actually do against it. What we will not tell you is the whole detail about what a mobile phone network is. Others can do that much better. Harald Welke and Dieter Spöhr have been doing this at many congresses 10 years ago. For example, when for the first time they showed their open source mobile phone network. Not just how a mobile phone network works, but also how you can run your own, which of course is happening at this Congress as well. And that's what we build on. We will not tell you in detail how a network like this works, but we'll talk about a small aspect of it. We'll ask an expert how it works. This is the responsible minister, and he told us that a mobile phone network consists of individual phone cells, so every end user's device that you connect to such a network communicates at every time with one single phone cell or none at all. And through that, every communication with such a device can be assigned to an individual cell, which is logical, because if it would not be sending anything, there would be nothing to receive. And this here is in a village in the state of Brandenburg, in the Berlin surroundings, where a new antenna was put up. And only if you have those, you can communicate. And then the network also knows where the device is, because the position of those cells is known. An operator, of course, knows more or less exactly where these masts are. And every communication that goes through such a network, through such a cell, can then be located. And it's not just the operators that know this. This is public information that you can see, that you can measure. And the devices know it too. Otherwise, they wouldn't know with what masts they can communicate. And that is, here's a map with based on OpenStreetMap. It's called Funkzellenabfrage Die, where you can put these masts on a map, and this is the area at Congress. Here you see all the masts here. If you're that's what your devices use. If they don't just use the internal network. And if these devices communicate with such a network, then with every communication, so-called metadata or traffic data is generated, and that contains a lot of individual fields, which we show you in this example. So these are the various records that are generated at the provider of Malte Spitz, a privacy activist who used to work for the Green Party, and he asked his phone operator for all the data that they were holding about him. And here you can see, I think this lasts for 11 minutes. That is a few weeks of mobile communication by Malte Spitz from the year 2009. And the interesting thing is that such a various amount of data, such varied information is generated. These are the data of just one person from selected days, but every single communication that this device makes with the network generates a record, and each entry has 29 fields, 29 details, begin and end of the communication, time zone, what service was used. And telephony is about a quarter of the information. SMS is about 2% these days, but what's very important now is mobile internet connections. Every time the Twitter or WhatsApp app sends something to the internet, every single time a record is generated at your mobile phone provider or operator, and with those 29 fields, You have things like the kind of communication, the number that's being called, the IMSI, the SIM card number, the serial number of the device, IP address, the internal one in the network and the public one, and of course the phone cell. Every phone cell that the phone communicates with has its own globally unique ID, which consists of a country code, a location code, and a cell ID. And this, taken together with the location data, makes up 6 or 7 of these fields, and that gives you the information that the phone received an SMS, text message at some point, and was in a certain cell. Now, extra data such as a Wi-Fi hotspot may be there, but sometimes not. But these are the communications, the metadata that are being generated each time. And how long is that being stored? That's what we will see next. Right, this is the important question. How long is this data being stored? In the data retention law, the thing was that 10 weeks was it used to be 6 months in the old German data retention law, and the new one asks for 10 weeks. But what that means, we have seen with multi-spitz, and the problem with this data retention is that it is currently ineffective in Germany for the country of North Rhine-Westphalia. But the question is whether the providers voluntarily, more or less, store all these fields. Anyway, the German magazine Spiegel researched how long providers had been storing before the new data retention law came into force. And that's what we've put on this slide here. So internally into the network, it was between 0 and 180 days, depending on the network. And we don't quite know how these things are handled today. As I said, data retention is not obligatory for providers these days, but that doesn't mean that providers don't act as they did before. There is no guarantee. These data are earlier than the date that the new data retention law came into force. So probably these data voluntarily are being held for quite a time, even without an obligation by law. It's often 1 month at least with data retention 3, but sometimes even longer for debugging, accounting, and sometimes these providers would like to use these data commercially too, but that's the subject for another talk.
These data, it just looks like a boring table, but they tell quite a lot about a certain person. They can tell you this is from Walter Spitz, from the data set that you saw before. You see the network where he connected to. The dots are communication partners, the nodes are communication partners, and there's maybe then somewhere a central point in the center where he is. It's basically a social network, but this is not that important. Let's show the other video with the location data. We didn't add it, I'm sorry. And that would be the more important one. The project Verräterisches Handy by Zeit Online. We'll just try it again. So there it is. This is called a life hack. So this is just from these metadata and the location data from the mobile phone cell where Multispitze was. In some ranges this is quite exact because you know exactly where the antennas are. And you see where somebody is, which congresses somebody attends, where people sleep and where people sleep when they don't sleep at home. These are all data about just one person. With the mobile phone cell query, there's not just data from one person, but from all persons in a particular cell. One example of such a query that happened that the police of Berlin did. This is the starting point, how the police wanted the right to the
local judge, to a judge.
They wanted to start such a query, and you see below a query of mobile phone cells where this query shall be done. In these days, there are usually not the cells written by themselves, because that's a lot of work to find all that data for GSM, UMTS, for all providers. Usually these days, the police only adds the location, Berlin, street, etc., and then the network providers search out which cells are relevant. That's a theory, but in practice, we visualize this a lot. Example, in Berlin, there were a series of crimes that they wanted to investigate, and the police came. They had this location, and you see in the circles which cell phone towers are receptable in this street, and the police asked the operators to just give out all of them in the hope to find an entry of who did it, and they found thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s of data sets. So you see that contrast. In the first video you had one person only. This is now the reverse case. You don't ask for one cell phone number. You ask for many cells and take the data of everybody who was in these cells. And in the Berlin central city, this might be tens of thousands of people, tourists, inhabitants. Unfortunately, we cannot show you a live data set. The argumentation often is, these data, they are just cell phone numbers. It's not that big deal, etc. But, well, that's a problem which is solvable with the so-called Bestandsdatenabfrage.
Asking phone providers for their customer data.
It's also called the Federal Phone Book, and there are over 100 authorities which are entitled to do such a query, which number is registered to which person, and it's done that often that last year there were 12.5 million queries. It's 2.5 minutes. So if somebody says, hey, I have just a cell phone number and no person behind it, authorities can find it out. There are a lot of authorities which could do that, police, even without a judge, and they can be authorized quite easily. And a police officer can do it without any further authorization. And also the providers, the operators, they need to provide an automated way of giving out this data. And there are APIs which the police can use. And so that's also why we have that a big number of queries. And that's also quite a bit of backdoor of the data retention law. Well, this is a backdoor for the data retention law. You don't need a judge which needs to say yes.
Which needs to decide. Then it's not just concerning criminal cases, but also customs information. Loads of authorities have access to this data. And also in criminal investigations, this is not always very helpful because these data are not very reliable, because often it is the case that the data simply get outdated because SIM cards are being passed on to others. Inside the same shared flat, the landline is registered to one person who's long moved out. So you can't get so far with that data. Companies sometimes register hundreds of SIMs for their staff, and you never know who exactly has which individual SIM card. And of course, you can use that as an opportunity to protect your own data, as even the Federal Office for Information Security admits, because they, in a somewhat older publication, but it's still on their website, I checked, why don't you use prepaid cards for anonymizations? You have no bill, you don't need a bank account, you can just pay and charge. And they then said, swapping data and prepaid cards without ID checks, that's a great opportunity, great way of protecting your identity effectively from mobile phone operators. This is what the state says on the one hand, and with the other hand, they prohibit this. There was a law in 2 years ago that disallowed unregistered prepaid cards beforehand. In theory, you would have to register, but the registration did not have to be checked. So you could register someone called Mickey Mouse or André Meister, perhaps. Hopefully, don't do that. Don't register them in my name. But right. But now it was added that ID cards have to be given, or if you speak with click workers, you have to register that somehow. But that is a loophole that was closed in Germany, but Germany isn't alone in the world. And in the EU, it's not like that at all. Only the countries in red have a registration obligation. In Austria, the law is a few months old, but they fell by the wayside too. They are red now, but not the UK, for example. And this is where, in a place where EU roaming exists. So you could actually buy a SIM card in any other country and use it here. And the EU has actually noticed that there is not much use in using this for terror defense. In any case, if you travel internationally, it's surprising that sometimes you arrive at some airport and buy a SIM card without showing an ID at all or something. Disregarding the fact that gives you much better data tariffs. So in the UK, for £20, you can buy 50 gigabytes, I noticed, without an ID card, by the way. So I paid with my credit card, but if I had paid in cash, it wouldn't have been able to track me or trace that back to me. So that's a very typical example for a so-called anti-terror law that the real terrorists are not shocked by at all. And it's one of the most easiest exercises next to getting some detonating chemicals and some TNT to get a SIM card. And having seen one example of mobile phone queries in the authorities' everyday life, let's look at what this is based on. So how much is it used? And the next slide will show you how often vehicles were set on fire in Berlin. That was the series of crimes that we mentioned earlier. So it turns out it was a frustrated, unemployed person whose girlfriend had broken up with him. But connected to every single vehicle fire, they made these mobile phone queries, and that's what it looks like. And that is an explanation for the number of phone queries that happened in Berlin, and that was more than one every day, and that generated a lot of data sets, 15 million with 11 million different phone numbers, so far more probably than live in Berlin. Or in the area, in the agglomeration, there's about 4 million people, 1.5 mobiles per person, perhaps. And then you add people from abroad or other federal states that come to Berlin and that get into the dragnet of this investigation. But then, of course, Berlin is not alone in the world. There are nice other places, such as Dresden. This is a symbol image for Dresden, an AfD supporter, and supporter for the far-right alternative for Germany. And this is a place where the oldest cases of mobile phone queries went public in 2011. They received the Big Brother Award in 2012. And this was a Nazi march in memory of some Nazi, in quote, heroes. And there were counter demonstrations and massive amounts of phone queries took place. And In that event, more than 900,000 communications data records landed at the police with 250,000 phone numbers. And then also they had 40,000 phone numbers that they somehow found interesting. And for those, they asked for the customer data at the operators. And that's what made mobile phone server queries very well known, or perhaps we should say ominous, in the public debate. And the debate also was about the fact that this mainly affected areas where there were demonstrations. It was not just an intrusion into telecommunications secrecy, but also into the basic rights of freedom of assembly, because, of course, this had a strong chilling effect if the fact that you have taken part in a demonstration will immediately land you in police computers. Of course, that's some time ago. We have current numbers from the state of Saxony, where the police sometimes use these kinds of insignia, as shown in the slide, and the numbers are not always comparable. There were probably a few more phone server queries there per court case, but the numbers were high, and far more than one per day. And concerning the federal level, there are a few numbers. The Federal Criminal Police Office performed 125 phone server queries, Customs 96, altogether 570, so 2 per day in 2017 for Germany. We don't have overall numbers for Germany. The individual federal states, interestingly, not all states publish these statistics or actually have these statistics, but we assume that there is at least one per federal state per day, because there's no reason to assume that the other states will not use this. And then we have, unfortunately, we only have figures for some federal states where there was particular political pressure concerning the topic of mobile phone server queries, and where this was placed on the political agenda, and the state parliaments then said, please, government, give us your numbers. But there are no comparable numbers across federal states. There are not numbers from every state, and there are no numbers across the whole federal state of Federal Republic. And there is one statistic that is not very useful because it doesn't distinguish between targeted queries and mass queries. And we therefore kind of try to estimate what the numbers are, and we believe that it is one query per day and federal state. And the problem with statistics is that it's one paragraph in the criminal code, or the criminal process code, and that is for all kinds of mobile phone server queries, whether it's individual or mass queries. So it's a bit hard to register this. And the complete dark zone, another complete dark zone, is the area of secret services. You see the previous head of the Interior Intelligence Service, Mr. Maaßen, here. We know that all the services do this, but we have no figures at all. We have tried for this talk to get some international data, and we use our EU networks, and unfortunately it is the same as with all the federal states in Germany. There are very little states that actually register these numbers and make them publicly accessible. That is amazing. The police and investigating authorities do not want to have this topic in the public debate. In one friendly state, Denmark, we learned that there were 374 queries last year. That's about one per year. And that points to the impression that this is done a bit less than in Germany, but then Denmark has fewer residents, and maybe they don't have so many vehicle arson attacks. Interestingly, a comparison with the US, T-Mobile, one of the large operators in the US, reports for 2017 4,855 mobile phone server queries across the country, and that is only one operator, but not the largest. And if you try to scale the numbers up, you again get about one mobile phone server query per US state and day, or a bit more actually. And regarding the operators in Germany, a phone server query is always performed with all operators, because you want the complete set, of course, in cases of doubts, all networks that cover a certain area. I've never seen a phone server query that was just put to one individual operator. But anyway, That's so much about statistics, and we then asked ourselves if this is the scale at which it is used. The Data Protection Commissioner talks about a standard measure. Then it will be interesting to know what the legal basis for this is. And there is no use. It's no use. A bit of law will be necessary. If you look at the criminal court case code, and we've cut it down to the necessary sentences which authorities are allowed to conduct these queries, and it requires a suspicion that one of the particularly severe crimes has been committed. That's what the Criminal Procedure Code says. Not just severe, but particularly severe. And these particularly severe crimes have to be very severe in the individual case. So if you consider the wording, there are two hurdles here, and the investigation of the fact has to be very much more difficult in other ways. And the data, which of course, as we said, could be the data of hundreds or thousands of people that most of all are completely innocent. So there has to be a proportionate amount of data, proportionate to the relevance of the issue in question. So it could be terrorism, murder, perhaps. That's what you would think. That's what the theory says. In practice, things are different. Symbol image, this is Berlin police. These are the guys who we got their whose statistics we got, and we checked how many terror cases there were. None. Manslaughter is about 1%, and murder is about 2%. Sexual harassment, about 5%. So these could be the cases where we might agree, but in the overall statistics, this is negligible. And the decisive crime which led to mobile phone snag queries was theft. 72%, 3/4 of all mobile phone snag queries, various theft crimes. So you can have quite a large question mark on whether these are particularly severe crimes. And other crimes that play a prominent role here are, for example, drugs, quite far up the list, quite high on the list. With all surveillance measures that we look at, drugs are fairly about the first. As soon as a new measure is introduced, we remember the Bavarian state Trojan. What was this about? Anabolica. Someone from the Czech Republic shipped too many pills. And another prominent thing, theft, handbag theft, for example. Handbag robbed, nothing in it, then thrown away, sure. So let's have a mobile phone query, all of Berlin, please. And very important, credit card fraud. Again, mobile phone queries are used whatever for. And another issue where we do agree that this is very severe crime.
Immerhin 1120 Fässer.
Beer barrel crimes, 120 stolen. That is a severe crime. At a value of 33,600 euros. No question that it's a very severe crime. The Berlin Data Privacy Commissioner, after we introduced this data, which is 6 years ago, he went and asked the prosecuting authorities for the data, when were these queries performed, and he analyzed this, and then he published a report which can be seen on netzpolitik.org, and that is quite a shocking report. It should be used only in exceptional cases, but his conclusion is that this obviously has become an everyday routine measure, and also one that is done without adherence to the legal foundations, the conditions. It's not our words, the Commissioner's words, a quote. And of course, he's no longer in office, but the employees that were involved are still in place, and they're very active ones, fortunately. And there were some structural defects that they found. Proportionality is always neglected, checking that, and very importantly, the rights of the people concerned are ignored, because they would have to be notified if, in a secret investigative measure, they come into that dragnet, are caught in that dragnet. There's a very important background. Because if you intrude into someone's privacy, that's always in violation of a basic rights. So according to constitutional court jurisdiction, it's even worse if it's done in secret. So these incisions have to be in public, and if that's not possible in a certain criminal case, then the secrecy has to be removed as soon as possible to mitigate the violation of the basic law. That's very clear, and that is implemented in the Criminal Procedure Code. This is an extract from the law. The people concerned have to be notified.
So, whom of you has been notified already? No hands up. We also don't know anybody. And what is the reason for it? The prosecutors. Yeah. Prosecutors. Thank you, Sabalis. So, what? And they say that there was no interest to notify somebody. We didn't know that somebody wanted to be notified. And then an activist, or a friend activist, said that he would be notified. And then that's really difficult because it's not your decision. And if we need to have a register of everybody who would want to be registered, it's very difficult. Alternatively, he also tried by copying his mobile contract, so to make sure he's authorized. There's also a passage in the law which clears this in detail, and it's not clear for me how this passage is interpreted.
Love letters only.
Next answer from was the
prosecuting authorities.
We don't have any addresses and we cannot check them because this would be a severe thing. And, well, they would not need any names of addresses and addresses because they have all phone numbers. They could, in theory, send SMSs or call. Seems simple, but didn't happen. But then these guys took care of the problem. That's the pirate fraction of the Abgeordnetenhaus, which
the Berlin Parliament
of the German Parliament.
Berlin. And there was a hearing in Parliament that discussed the option of notifying via calls or SMS, and they actually managed to build up enough public pressure that the then Grand Coalition in Berlin, the Social Democrats and Christian Union, that they actually resolved that such a notification system should be installed, and that there was, of course, severe resistance from the Berlin prosecuting authorities. Here's the head of that authority, and he said, well, if we do this, that's such a lot of work for our prosecutors, we will not get anything else done, and we still can't see any public interest in the notification. But fortunately, the Berlin Parliament didn't react, and they actually passed this resolution. But nothing happened.
Nothing happened. And there was the Great Coalition. Thomas Heimann was the... Yeah. He tried to solve this programmatically. In the evening at 9 p.m. My phone rang, and then Thomas Heimann he asked that I could program, so tried to torpedo it because it cost too much money, and Thomas Heimann thought who could build it. I wrote the concept, nothing happened first, I don't know the backgrounds, etc. The union has just not reacted to the parliament. Then we needed a real action. 2016 there was a red-green coalition, and we took contact to them very fast. I got a contract to to do such a notification system. And in 2018, this went live.
So this is the mobile phone security transparency system of the state of Berlin.
Don't
Don't rejoice too soon, but this is the first system across the country that we got running. This is a transparency system, the first attempt in Germany to register mobile phone queries or the affected people and inform them. How does this work? We'll show you a few screenshots. You have to register with the system. That is the rules that the Berlin Parliament passed. So you enter your phone number, and you then get, you receive a text message with a PIN, a confirmation code, which you enter on the website. You click OK, and then you receive another text message saying that you are now registered with the mobile phone security transparency system. And everyone knows that then later, when that notification is actually triggered, you receive a message like this. We want to send a text message with a code like this, and you get a map showing you at which point and at what time you were caught in the net of a mobile phone query. And this is the first time that this law is actually implemented and exists, but it's also only a small first step. So we'll just play a bit of angel and devil. Why do I have to register, and why am I not notified if I don't register, as the law says? Yeah, well, the former answer would be because the Parliament passed the law, passed the resolution that day, but there is a factual answer as well, and that is that you never quite know who the actual user of a mobile phone number is. We did say that the asking for customers' data is not a very reliable way. At the operators, they don't always know who the actual users are. And with this registration that you have to repeat every 3 months, we want to ensure that the number is actually from the time of registration over the phone query, and the notification is used by the same person. And why 3 months? Because mobile phone providers sometimes will reassign numbers after 3 months. So if you have this 3-month interval, you can be pretty sure that a number that is actually in disuse in between is not going to be reassigned in that same period. And then the registration expires and would have to be repeated. So if I would forget this registration text messages, I'm out, right? Yes, that is the case, but I didn't find any better solution. If one of the intelligent people in the room would have any better way, I'll be happy to hear your advice, but it doesn't seem to be possible any other way without actually handing in any identification, because that's what we don't want. We want to minimize the data. And for how long has this been live? I think mid-13th November it went live. And how many people were notified? The information notifications will only start next year. There is a two-stage. Yes, it does sound absurd, but there is a reason again, because we can only inform about mobile phone queries that happened after registration, because otherwise we cannot make sure that it's the same person using them. We might inform people about phone queries that happened actually to previous users. There's no other way to do this, but that's a procedural problem, and we hope that by next summer we'll send out the first notifications. And won't that generate a database of interesting phone numbers of potential rebels? Yes, that is another example, a disadvantage, I admit. We tried to mitigate that administratively somehow, because this opt-in list could be stored with the police or the prosecuting authorities. That we did not do. It is held at the Justice Administrative Department of the Berlin government, so that's one step away of the actual investigating authorities and the Interior Secret Service. And it has to be said that we can never be 100% sure that these data at some point will be shared if there is a kind of political will, but I can say that there has not been such an attempt. And of course, the cell data has been passed on anyway. And why on this website do I have to register individually? Why aren't simply all the queries shown? That is another interesting question. The phone cell queries, to publish them is not actually provided for in the procedural code, and the Parliament would have to resolve that this should happen as well. There's no legal basis, therefore I'm interested in whether Berlin on its own can do this or whether this needs federal legislation, but we don't have the legal basis right now. And of course, the URLs wouldn't have to be cryptic and unguessable. Yeah, that is true. That's an interesting suggestion from Andre that I took up. The ticket has been added, and we'll see what we can do. As I said, this is a pilot project that Berlin, as the first federal state, has set up, and I was very happy to hear that other federal states were clearly interested in taking over the system and using it too. And so if we can build it in a way from the administrative point of view that other states could use it, that could be software as a service or something. How many have registered? Some hands. So you all can do this in the queue. Well, we didn't actually give you the URL. That's fts.berlin.e. I hope you are not going to run a DDoS attack on it now. Okay, but then notification is only the minimal consensus of what the law says. Now that we have 6 years of a parliament resolution, that is bad enough to let people actually know how many queries take place, but that's only the basis for the population actually considering whether they like this procedure and for which cases. And a while ago I asked the police of Munich, here is a simple image with the Munich interior minister, why they don't keep that data, and they said, well, we don't want to make every criminal aware that they should switch off their mobiles. And well, apparently criminals never switch off their phones, right? Particularly you get the spontaneous criminals this way. If someone spontaneously draws a knife, then yes, of course, the person will not have the time to switch off their phone, but maybe they won't make a call in that time and generate a record. But the success of mobile phone secretaries is actually very, very low. That would be it's more suspicion than actually identification and proof. There is very little actual statements about successes from mobile phone secretaries. You could imagine a lot in theory, but concrete evidence, statistics, this conviction was only possible because of mobile phone secretaries I haven't heard of, and you probably didn't know that either, right? So if we all know how often such queries take place, if we receive text messages, then of course the question is, what do you do against that?
So one thing is don't take your mobile phone or use a pseudonymous prepaid card, or another possibility is to become politically active. I find this is too much surveillance, which should not be that way. And the metadata which are analyzed with the cell phone query are exactly these which are
used in data retention.
That's data retention which is done for everyone. It's not just for a terrorist. Everyone is being under surveillance. It's thousands, 10,000s, hundreds and thousands of people, and also the data retention law needs to go away. The various experiments of the German lawmakers were not that successful. We should be more pragmatic. The lawmaker is becoming ridiculous. So, politically, the phone cell query is not that a big topic with the different parties. And the data protection officer, he said it's not. As a small step, I would wish to restore the...
indem man sicherstellt, dass diese Maßnahme wirklich nur noch bei schwersten
So it
Straftaten.
should be ensured that this measure is always used with the most severe of crimes, and that's then something you could discuss politically. And where should the cutoff be? I guess it should be about 5 years of expected prison sentence. That's what we could call a severe crime. So you could change the law saying that the judge would have to justify that in the concrete case, on the basis of the current evidence, a sentence of at least 5 years should be expected. To have that in the law and actually give a reason, that would lead to mobile phone search queries for theft, for example, becoming illegal and would no longer occur.
Aber es wäre schon mal viel gewonnen, wenn
it would be really good if the existing laws would be obeyed by police. And we analyzed what political parties in Germany said to the data retention and phone cell queries. We have this from CDU and CSU.
These are the party manifestos for the last federal elections in 2017.
They say we don't know in detail about it, but, well, we expected that they are for it. Clear words from Bavaria. CSU says that we need to do more queries. And
the Interior Secret Service was to be authorized to use metadata. So the Social Democrats, shall I do them?
we go to the Social Democrats. And the election program, nothing. There is nothing about these topics. But
it was always the Social Democrats that brought us these laws. They were the ones responsible for these laws. So if you expect from the Social Democrats that they would go against data retention and phone search queries, no, it won't happen.
Maybe it's something else with the Free Democrats. They would have a judge to
authorize
the queries. And they said that they don't want a mass surveillance of people who did nothing. And
they did call for these measures to be reduced, and some of these measures could actually concretely be put into law. And the Left Party is actually the only of the large parties that clearly and unequivocally has said that they are against this. In their manifesto, they write that we want to secure the right to self-determination against data retention, against phone search queries, video surveillance, and dragnet surveillance. And the Greens, they are, well, where I am more or less, they want to strengthen proportionality and they're against data retention. It's much more effective, they write, to use proportionate measures to monitor individuals who have given cause, other than instead of having 80 million people monitored without cause by data retention or phone search queries. We are against these measures. One party is missing, the Alternative for Deutschland. What do they say? Nothing. Nothing in their manifesto. But, well, seriously, as if they were against surveillance, and who votes for Nazis because they were against phone search queries has very different problems, actually. Has a whole lot of other problems. Right. To conclude, an outlook. This is the timeline for data retention. That's a view to history. In 2016, the current data retention law came into force, and then a few months ago it failed at the court in North Rhine-Westphalia, and we wait for the Constitutional Court or the European Court of Justice to officially abolish it and get rid of data retention with mobile phone search queries. We know of no no concrete legal legislative measures. We showed you one particular measure, how you can mitigate things with the transparency system. That is a step towards more transparency, which I like. And if they have to expect that their measures get known and that someone will get legal recourse, that in my view, of course I'm biased, it's not a panacea, but it will be necessary to reduce these measures by law, but transparency and monitoring from a rule of law point of view will improve things. Andre? Yes, and the next year surely, probably will be the year when the Constitutional Court in Germany will most likely rule on data retention, and in particularly with the European Court of Justice judgments that we had, we assume that mass surveillance of everyone's mobile phone data will be judged to be in violation of basic rights, and we're looking forward to the procedure in Karlsruhe. And that's it from us about phone cell queries, surveillance for everyone, and we're looking forward to the Q&A.
Ja, super, vielen Dank.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Fragen. Wir haben schon die ersten an dem Mikrofon stehen.
We have the first people queuing up for Q&A. Let's start with microphone 2, please.
Das Mikro ist offen.
So, mic is open. I'm Sasha. Hi. I'm of the newbies about here. I really like what you do, but how relevant is it? You say one inquiry per county per day seems pretty low to me.
We have 60,000 phone cells.
How relevant is it? Is it?
Well, we didn't calculate this or estimate this. I assume that every person in Germany has been caught, will be caught in a phone cell query at least once a month. And if that was me, I would at least like to know this. And if I am suspected of a crime, then if I'm not suspected of a crime, then this should definitely stop.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Wir haben eine Frage aus dem Netz, der Signalwandel bitte.
Questions from the internet? Yes. Is there a template to get my personal data without having
a judge approve it?
Because there was a
GDPR query.
Thank you.
I personally don't know any template letters. I know that Malta had to go to the courts to obtain his data from Telecom, and there was no actual judgment, but a settlement. That tells me that Telecom, in the end, was willing to talk. I don't know how they would behave today if you would go to them, so I can't tell you. And I can't give you any templates. I would always encourage doubt that before you go to a lawyer, you should talk to your privacy commissioners. They are often very helpful, and they often have good contacts in civil society. So that would be free, and you could get a creative kind of help.
Microphone number 4. For me, the following question arises. You said that it's not proportionate. This should only be with these severe crimes. Before the court, then
if the defense argues that these data cannot be used, what's the situation? Well, I have to say that mostly data that's obtained illegally can be used in court. In the US, these are much stricter laws. It's not what you know from the movies, but in Germany it's almost always possible, even if an investigative measure is illegal, the data can normally be used, and I can hardly imagine how a mobile phone cell query can be done with such a great violation of the law that it cannot be used. It's not, so there is no incentive to act legally, and that's not the case in the US, because investigators have to take much care not to violate the law, because then the court case will blow up. But here, the courts are of the strict conviction that police officers do not need to be disciplined in that way, as you can easily see.
Thank you. We don't have that much time anymore. Microphone 1 and then mic 3. Hi, thank you for the talk. What happens with the data after such a query? How long are they stored somewhere at the police?
That is a good question. We didn't actually talk about this much here. The police authorities do this in software. I have tried to ask them which software they use. It was something self-made. They had something called electronic file support system. They actually put this into Excel sheets at some point, but they blew up on them because the data became too large. And then there is a software called Roller, RS-Case, and IBM has a software, and they try to find cross hits, for example, with those vehicle arson attacks. Which phones are present in several locations, and that leads me to the point. They try to find these data through different instances. If they do not use that data any longer, they have to delete it. But the State Privacy Commissioner of Berlin actually verified checked how this is done, and he noticed that after many years, these data still existed in the file. And also it said that these data should only be used as a last resort. And it turned out that they run the query, put it on a CD, and don't even look at the data. So that's you can assume that they are deleted soon, but no, that's not happening. The law says that data should be deleted as soon as the court case is legally over, or once the legal term has expired, and that would be quite a long time. Expiry deadlines are 10 or 20 years. But I at least can say about Berlin that the police are trying hard to be legal, to act legally and restrict the access to these data. Andre already mentioned that things are put on a CD, so they're out of the regular system. You put the CD into the file, and therefore you can't easily access it, only if you actually look into the file. So generally, police were extremely cooperative, also when we evaluated the system. I wasn't that sure, but my experience was very good. They do seem to want this system in Berlin. That's my impression. The civil servants I was dealing with, for some reason, whether that's a PR measure, whether they are afraid that they would have to manually process these queries, I don't know, but they were very cooperative, and thank you.
Okay, es tut mir leid. Die letzte Frage.
The last question.
Deine Frage bitte.
So, your question, please. Hi, hello. Nice talk. Each car has a telemetry box. They have SIM cards. Will each car be tracked in the future?
Well, it will be registered in this measure, that is for sure. Phone sectors will capture this, data retention will capture this, and then there is this e-call. Yes, with the mobile phone secretary, we have just one mosaic piece, one puzzle piece of the whole set of state surveillance measures. Car surveillance, there's a lot. We are in the year 5 or 6 after Snowden, so there's all kinds of surveillance technologies out there. Car surveillance using the mobile SIMs that are in there, that's a wide area, of course, but these data will be registered in phone queries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A great applause for our speakers, Andre and Ulf.